Welcome to the Solid Signal podcast for March 19th, 2013. We're going to be taking a look at the interesting, or at least extremely complex, subject of must-carry and retransmission consent agreements. These are at the heart of those fee fights that we're all so worried about in 2013. Naturally, it all comes down to money, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. Cable television really took off in the 1980s in the United States, and back then, broadcast networks were worried that they would be left out completely. That's why the FCC put in place must-carry rules, meaning that if a station was available in a local market, that a cable company had to carry it. Back then, satellite wasn't a concern, and in fact, until 2000, local cable companies were the only ones who could carry local channels. Satellite companies couldn't even do it. If a broadcaster wants to use the must-carry rule to its own benefit, it can't charge for its own content, though. And on the other hand, the cable and satellite company can't charge for and can't receive payment for carrying that channel. Local broadcasters have the option to opt out of must carry in favor of something called retransmission consent. Retransmission consent means that they can charge for their content. That's right, the local broadcasters can charge cable and satellite companies just to carry their station that's available over the air. However, they waive their right to that must-carry provision. So if they say, we're going to charge you for it, but if you don't want to pay for it, we're not going to force you to take it. The problem is that neither must-carry nor retransmission consent agreements actually really benefit the customer. The best situation would be something in the middle, where cable and satellite companies try to reach agreements with local channels, but if they don't, that there's some provision to let them carry those channels even when there's no contract using those must-carry provisions. Right now, if a cable or satellite provider can't reach a contract with a local station, that local station has the right to demand that cable or satellite provider take those channels off the air, and the cable or satellite provider has to do it. So anytime there's a blackout, it really comes from the broadcaster. The satellite company would be more than happy to keep providing that service without a contract, but the broadcaster stops them from doing it. For the most part, the FCC hasn't wanted to get in the middle of fights between broadcasters and cable and satellite providers. So, more often than not, they let these threats go through. Channels go dark, and millions of people are left without a broadcast network. It's been suggested that there be some sort of mandatory arbitration, sort of like what happens between the team owners and the unions in Major League sports. I think that's a great solution, and I think there's an outgoing FCC chairperson now. His successor should really consider something like that. At the same time, the rules for retransmission probably need to be overhauled from top to bottom. They need to take into account cable-only channels, such as Comedy Central, MTV, that sort of thing, and sports channels that can be carried a la carte. Right now, pay TV channels are covered by the FCC in some ways, but for the most part, they're not legislated the same way that broadcasters are. Why? Because they don't broadcast to the general public. You can't pick up Nickelodeon with an antenna, in other words. In the meantime, I've forecasted that there are going to be a lot of fee fights in 2013. Fights between pay TV providers and content providers over whether or not they can carry content and at what price. Last year's Viacom blackout was the largest pay TV blackout in history, but I forecast there will be an even bigger one in 2013. That may get the FCC off its duff and get it to making some changes, very important and much needed changes, in the retransmission consent system. Of course, you don't have to be held hostage by a cable company. Just stick an antenna up and get all your local channels for free. That brings us to the end of another podcast. If you have an idea for a future podcast, go to blog.solidsignal.com, click on the Suggest a Topic link at the top right. I'll be looking forward to seeing you there, and until next week, have a great day.